welcome back to the StackCast. This is episode 11, and today we have here with us Kayaba. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, Luke Parker, or Kayaba. I'm the lead developer of SeraiDEX, a decentralized exchange, initially focusing on Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Monero. And I'm also a volunteer for Monero.
Awesome. So do you want to just kind of jump right into Serai really quick, or do you want to go into a little bit more of your personal background first if you're comfortable with that?
Yeah, I'd be fine talking about my personal background. I got into cryptocurrency in 2016 or 2017 because I was underage at the time. And if you're underage, you can't get a bank account, you can't get a PayPal, you can't sign up, you can't take a half-hour car trip to go down to a Western Union and take your money that way. So basically, I was working as a developer, or at least I wanted to work as a developer. But every time I tried to get work, there was just no way for me to get paid. And eventually, what I fell into was this one cryptocurrency group through a political advocacy group I was volunteering with at the time. And they're like, "Oh yeah, we'll pay you $600 if you write this piece of code." And I'm like, "Cool, how would I get paid?" And they're like, "In cryptocurrency." And I'm like, "What's that?" And I looked into it a bit, and they said they would pay me in cryptocurrency. I'm like, "Oh, this is interesting. I just create an address and it has this token and it's worth money." And then I went on to Newegg because at the time I was trying to work as a developer to build my first computer. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I can buy computer parts with this." So I did that, and it was my first notable contract as a developer. And since there, I've always been involved with cryptocurrency in some way. Initially, for me, it was just a way for me to actually get paid. But obviously, I feel like that speaks to a lot of the core ethos around what cryptocurrency is. It's an accessible financial platform to everyone, regardless of who they are. So while for me, it was because I was underage and PayPal would kick me off if I ever made a PayPal, that's just my use case. And I understand there's a lot of other people who may not have the same story or may have the same story, but for similar reasons, they've been disenfranchised. And it's important to make systems accessible to them. So I initially floated around Ethereum a bit, ended up working next to a lot of Bitcoin developers who were working on like Bitcoin forks because that was all the rage back in 2017. And then I fell into Monero, not only because I had an appreciation for privacy. I believe privacy is fundamental. But because an exchange actually hired me to write some Monero tooling for them. And I did that as a contract. And that got me decently well versed with how Monero works. And then I stepped back for a while. I didn't continue working for Monero. I just did contracts here and there, mainly in the Ethereum space. Worked on my own project for a few years, which unfortunately I shuttered. And then finally, during the last few months of me working on my own project, I actually built an atomic swap implementation. And it was the first atomic swap implementation to support the Monero atomic swap protocol. Well, atomic swap's a way to trustlessly exchange like Bitcoin for Litecoin, have been around for several years now. The Monero atomic swap protocol has only been around for a couple of years because Monero is a privacy coin, and as a privacy coin, it has all of its own intricacies. So a couple of years ago, the Monero atomic swap protocol was released, and while it was for Monero, it also worked with the project I was working on at the time because it had some similar technical constraints. So I made an implementation of it for my project, and then it was expanded to Nano, and then it was expanded to Monero. It's been expanded to one or two other coins since then as well. And that kind of got me into the Monero community. It's not just, "Oh yeah, I wrote some code for a contract a year ago and I never talked about it." But hey, here's an actual project contributing to the Monero ecosystem. It's on GitHub. And since then, I stuck around the community. And after my own project winded down, I realized that decentralized exchanges are important. They're valuable. We live in an era where people take your money any chance they get and not give it back. We see this with FTX. We see this with certain sites just shutting down. We see this with various exchanges getting hacked. I believe just yesterday, might have been 2 days ago by now. Yeah, 2 days ago, the multi-chain, which was a very popular way to move funds across chains, which is a bridge, not a decentralized exchange, but similar topic here. They recently got hacked, exploited, rugged. No one really knows yet for over $100 million. So that's definitely a thing. And I realized, hey, I want to do something better, something that's secure and is actually decentralized. And not only that, but I want to include Monero and be able to be that connection to privacy so everyone can have privacy accessible. And that's what got me where I am today.
So if you were underage in, what did you say, 2016, 2017,
Mhm.
you were pretty young. So
Yeah,
you've kind of gotten a lot under your belt so far.
started early.
Definitely. Well, gosh, you said, I didn't want to forget to ask this. You mentioned that there was a project or a few that you ended up kind of binning. Do you mind if I ask about those?
Right, sure. At one point, I had my own cryptocurrency project, which never launched, yet also never took funding, never did an ICO, never did a token sale. I entirely self-funded my own development off of it via my contracts. So on the one hand, it never launched, and that's disappointing for various reasons. The other hand, no one was harmed, and I want to be very clear about that. I did not raise $10 million and then disappear. No. Well, I did shut it down. There was nothing really at stake there. It was meant to be an instant and feeless cryptocurrency like the Nano project, which was a cryptocurrency I participated in the community with for a while. But it was meant to resolve some security and decentralization and distribution. So it's basically just trying to build a better currency. After, I think, 3 years of working on it and building my own node from scratch, I kind of like to refer to it as my version of a college education. I didn't go to college, but I did spend 3 years building that thing from scratch. And I didn't give up. I didn't, like, after 1 year, launch it. There were a couple of other small projects that I saw get launched after 2 years of development or so, based off one or two developers. And Meros definitely could have been that. After about 2 years, it was alive. You know, you could run a node, it could talk to other nodes, it could kind of do transactions. But if you were a user and you weren't technical, you would look at it and think, oh yeah, this looks perfectly fine. So it's definitely something I could have launched, but the reason I didn't was because I didn't consider it good enough. I knew all of the issues. I knew how, if someone actually wanted to, how they could destroy it. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not going to launch a cryptocurrency that's just waiting for someone to come by and destroy. That's pointless. So it's something I kept iterating on. And while I never got it to where I wanted it to be at, the fact I kept iterating kept teaching me about how better to do things and helped me refine my skills a lot into where I am today.
All right. So where you are today. So the main kind of project that you have been working on for a while is SeraiDEX.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to get to that now? Can we
Sure.
jump in?
So I started wanting to work on Serai about a year and a half ago, I want to say. Largely out of frustration with current projects in the ecosystem, which are kind of in a similar place. So I got to work on my own project. There was this one cryptography paper going around for Frost. Frost is a way of producing signatures in a group. So the exact term I'll refer to it with is threshold multisig. It says if you have like 5 people in a wallet, you need 3 of them to produce a signature to actually get a valid signature. If only 2 people try to produce a signature, they'll fail to. So there's been a bunch of algorithms for threshold multi-signature over the years. But Frost is this really performant algorithm with the caveat it produces Schnorr signatures. Schnorr signatures have been discussed in Bitcoin for a very long time now because Bitcoin launched with a signature algorithm called ECDSA. ECDSA is literally just a signature algorithm that was meant to avoid the fact that Schnorr was patented. So because Schnorr was patented, it couldn't be deployed on Bitcoin or anywhere else. And everyone started using ECDSA, which is a very bad algorithm that makes a lot of people cry at night. But it wasn't patented, so it's what a lot of people used. And when Bitcoin came around, it was the standard and what everyone was using. But Bitcoin recently did enable Schnorr signatures as part of their Taproot upgrade. And then Ethereum, they also unfortunately did ECDSA just to be closer to Bitcoin and more compatible with existing Bitcoin cryptography. But you can use smart contracts to verify Schnorr signatures. And then for Monero doesn't use ECDSA. It doesn't use Schnorr either because it's a privacy protocol. What Monero does is it uses a ring signature known as CLSAG. CLSAG is a ring signature. That means there's 16 possible outputs, and the output you're using as an input is just one of them without revealing which one. And internally, the signature it does can be reduced to Schnorr, which means that there is this very efficient Schnorr threshold multisig algorithm going around called Frost. I implemented that, and Bitcoin was about to launch support for it. Ethereum could support it via smart contracts, and Monero's algorithm would work with it as long as I, added in the extra stuff around it. So I moved forward with Frost, and that made us very efficient regarding the cryptography. And I actually spent a lot of the time polishing the cryptography and trying to get libraries that, well, Serai could use it for its operations as a decentralized exchange. Other people in the ecosystem could also successfully use. That cryptography was also eventually audited by CipherStack, which I am quite happy was done. We feel like the audit went quite well. And it's just continued from there. We did our own Monero library because the existing C++ is a bit dated. Obviously, it's going to work with the most recent Monero protocol, but it's also been years of edits, tweaks, additions, and it's not designed with the power of hindsight. So not only that, but it does have a multi-signature algorithm, but unfortunately, it's not using the Frost design. And because of that, it's a bit slower than what we want. So one of the things we did is we rewrote the Monero wallet code entirely in Rust. We don't actually use any of the Monero C++. And we also implemented Monero threshold multisig using Frost instead of using what Monero does for the threshold multisig it offers. And that makes us many, many times faster. And that's kind of the backbone of our Monero integration. And from there, it's just been building the Bitcoin code, building the Ethereum code, building the decentralized exchange itself. Sorry if I focused a bit too much on the backend development there, but...
No, you're fine. I'm sure there are plenty of people that would like to hear exactly about that, so you're good.
So yeah. Currently, the work's just primarily on getting everything to talk to each other properly. Well, we can build a Bitcoin library and just say, it's a Bitcoin library, great. Now what? No, obviously we need to scan the Bitcoin chain. We need to find out what transactions we receive. We need to report it somewhere. We need to talk to the other validators on the network, and we need to actually publish our own transactions onto Bitcoin. So there's this entire flow there, which I'll try not to get into today. But yeah, it's mainly just been building that flow, building it securely, and making sure that we don't have errors, we don't have improper accounting, and that we can properly track all the movement of coins throughout our network and ensure the security of it. It ends up where if we have, say, 100 validators running the Bitcoin software, they'll realize there's been a transaction to Serai. They'll report it onto our own layer 1 blockchain. The Serai blockchain will action it however it's supposed to. If it's, swap this Bitcoin for Monero, it will say, okay, Serai received 10 Bitcoin and we're going to swap it for however much Monero. By the way, Monero people send this much Monero out. And then the rest of the software says, hey, someone did a swap Bitcoin to Monero. We were told to send out the Monero. Let's create a transaction, make sure the signature is done properly, and publish it. So basically, it's using multi-signatures to secure coins at all times. And the advantage of that compared to an atomic swap model, an atomic swap being if just the two of us decided I have Monero, you have Bitcoin, let's do a trade. That would be trustless and without any counterparties, which is why atomic swaps are great. Unfortunately, they also suffer from a high degree of latency because you have to lock your Bitcoin, then I have to lock my Monero, and only then can we claim the funds. So not only does it have a high degree of latency, but if you go offline at any point, you're also at risk of losing your funds. So there's also a security risk on your end. With Serai, you just have Bitcoin. You send the Bitcoin to the Serai network, and the Serai network sends out Monero. You can go offline at any point. If you go offline before you send the transaction, you just don't do a swap. If you go offline after you send the transaction, you do a swap because the Serai network will send it back to you. And that is trusting the Serai network to properly do it. But that's why it's decentralized. And hopefully we get to hundreds of validators. And it's not, oh, I'm a validator and I am picking my best friends, Jim, Bob, and Jerry. And yeah, no, we might steal from you. No, the validators are an open system. Anyone who puts up the Serai token as collateral can become a validator. And if there is misbehavior, their Serai token will be slashed. In which case you, as the aggrieved party, may actually do better because the Serai collateral would be worth more than the token's lost. But obviously no one wants that to happen in the first place. So it's a decentralized network. It's open validator set. Anyone can run a node and help contribute to the security of it. All just to give you the most secure way to move from Bitcoin to Monero and vice versa possible.
And sorry if you already answered this question and I just missed it at some point, but so the native token that you mentioned, what is that built off of?
So the Serai blockchain, it's its own layer one. I decided not to build a layer one from scratch again because I already tried that.
I wondered.
Discussed. It took a lot of years. It's not that I couldn't, it's that why would I? Because the focus of the Serai blockchain isn't to be, the 1 million transaction per second chain. No, it's just meant to be there to execute swaps. And obviously, while it does have to be performant, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking in that role. It's meant to be well done as a system, not exceptionally innovative as any individual component. So as part of that, I mainly just went for a blockchain framework. I could have forked Bitcoin, could have forked Ethereum, but those aren't meant to be decentralized exchanges. But nowadays, there are blockchain frameworks, the two most popular being Cosmos, which is in Go, and was the foundation of the Cosmos Hub, Gaia, along with Terra Luna and Osmosis. I think those are the three most popular Cosmos chains nowadays. I might be wrong about that third. So there's Cosmos as a blockchain framework written in Go, and then the other one is in Rust, and it's called Substrate. And it's actually the foundation of the Polkadot network. So that's also quite significant.
All right. Well, thank you. I did not know that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. We use Substrate just because it's in Rust and that better aligns with our tooling. I said we're using a framework. I said here's the popular ones. I didn't say which we were.
You're fine. You're fine. And this is a question I like to ask pretty much everyone that comes on here, but it's very simple. What made you feel like this was needed in the space? What made you feel like amongst the decentralized exchanges that exist out there already, that there was a niche somewhere for something new, something different?
Yeah, no, that's actually a great question. So atomic swaps have existed for several years. I'm trying to remember who did quote unquote the first one, because I think someone famous in the space technically did the first one. I'm trying to remember if it was the first Bitcoin to Litecoin swap. I don't remember if it was Buterin or if it was Charlie Lee, but I feel like some celebrity in the Bitcoin Ethereum space technically did the first Bitcoin Litecoin swap. But atomic swaps have been around for years. We can go to the The fact I'm blinking to think of how many atomic swap exchanges there have been, like their actual names, show you how memorable they are. Because I know there's been a bunch. I'm pretty sure there've been 7 or 8 actual exchange platforms built on atomic swaps. The only 2 I can remember off the top of my head are StackCast by the Komodo team, or technically not by the Komodo team, just largely associated with Komodo. And the other one would be Basic Swap, which isn't necessarily notable historically. It's just notable in the Monero community now because it's an atomic swap exchange, which does support the Monero atomic swap protocol, and it currently offers atomic swaps for Monero. And then to get more into the history of Monero atomic swap exchanges, there's been Commit. They're an organization which published an atomic swap platform. There's also been Farcaster, which raised $250,000 in community funding, if I recall correctly. I was briefly part of that. And then there is also Elizabeth's Ethereum Monero atomic swap protocol. So like there's a bunch of these protocols, even just for Monero. And then historically, there's been a bunch for the Bitcoin non-Monero ecosystem, most notably atomic DEX. Unfortunately, I don't think any of them have really ever taken off. The closest I want to say is Bisq. Bisq isn't using atomic swaps. It's technically using multisig, yet very differently from how I've discussed using it. But Bisq has a very similar UX to the atomic swap model. So if you want to talk about anything premised on atomic swaps in the UX it offers, Bisq, even though it isn't using atomic swaps, it's still a very good comparable. Bisq, unfortunately, it definitely has its users, and I'm not here to demerit it. I'm not here to demean it. I'm not here to say it's bad. But Bisq never became Coinbase. Bisq never became Binance. It never became Kraken. It never became one of those names. And that arguably was never the point of Bisq. You know, you could go back and forth on that for a while. But that doesn't change the fact I believe Bisq currently only does tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars a day in value. I'd have to double check that. I'm really not trying to misrepresent them. But my main point is that Bisq is still a small community in the grand scheme of things. There are, brand new projects on Ethereum who exceed their value in minutes of launching. So as much as I can respect the technology behind atomic swaps, the UX, the interactivity requirements, the latency, and arguably just the fact that no one put a good GUI in front of it has unfortunately prevented it from gaining adoption with users. And if we talk about users, so if users aren't going to use this nice software, even if you say, oh, it's so secure, it's so great, all you have to do is sit here and wait an hour. If users say they aren't going to do that, well, that sucks. Now users are going to be insecure. But we as developers can't change what users are going to do. If users are going to do things they shouldn't, we have to accept they're going to do things they shouldn't, and we have to kind of guide them a bit. So it's like, okay, I can't make you sit here for an hour. Where are you going to go? I'm going to go to FTX. I'm going to put all my money. I'm going to 10x leverage. I'm like, no, please don't do that. What about this? It's Serai. It's a decentralized exchange. It uses multisig. You don't have to sit here for an hour. You just send your funds and walk away, but it's still secure. It's not as secure, technically, but it's still very secure, and you should be fine. And that's what's kind of about. Well, as much as I can love atomic swaps and their technology, and initially I did actually want to use atomic swaps, users have said no. And if users have rejected that UX, then the question is, how can we offer them a UX they will accept, yet still doing our best for the security side of it? And that's what I think Serai is, a very solid compromise. It's still decentralized. It's still secure. Technically, the Serai network is a counterparty and fault party. I don't know what to really call it, because it also really is very hard to classify when you're saying, well, there's no one person involved. I can't just walk in, take the Bitcoin out the vault and walk away. No, it's a decentralized network, hopefully with hundreds of validators. So it's still very hard to describe, but basically it's still decentralized, and it still should be a secure way to swap between coins. As for the exact timing of when I did it, because there are other projects which have a very similar model, Serai isn't necessarily innovative with the overall design, just doing our best to be the best implementation of it. The exact reason I started on Serai when I did was because another project had announced a Monero proof of concept. And while I appreciated them wanting to list Monero, I personally reviewed their Monero integration, and I didn't believe it was secure. So when this other project walked in, said they were going to launch Monero, here's our proof of concept. And I walk in and see, wow, this is really not well-written code. All I know is that if I don't do anything, the project is going to eventually at some point launch it. And under my personal belief, they weren't going to launch it securely. So that means that from my perspective, at some point in the future, the Monero community is going to have this insecure service offered to them, yet presenting itself as a very secure service that everyone should use. And I didn't like that, but I knew I could say, oh, no, don't do that. That's so bad. I can sit here yelling and pointing all I want. That wasn't actually going to accomplish anything. If I just want to sit and yell, I'm just going to be old man who yells at cloud, and no one's going to listen. So if I actually want to protect the community, I had to offer something better. I couldn't just say, don't do that, that's bad. I had to say, do this instead, it's even better. And that's what really got me to work on Serai. It was just trying to offer a actually secure service and protect the community accordingly.
And that's a great point. It is going to naturally just be harder to get someone to stop using a certain service or doing a certain thing that may not be always in their very best interest if nothing else is offered that kind of can be transitioned to. Basically, if you're just going to go put that on hold, don't do bad, not good enough, but then you can't go, this is an example of what actually is good enough, then that's kind of obvious, but of course that's the way it's naturally going to go.
Right. So the other thing I recently announced my work on was full chain membership proofs for Monero. Full chain membership proofs are a replacement for the ring signatures we currently have, whereas the current ring signatures select 15 random outputs from the chain and say, oh, I'm spending an output and it's one of these 16. And because it's one of these 16, if you randomly guess, you only have a 7% chance and you'll never actually find me. Yeah, that's good. And it's reasonable sender privacy, and I'm not here to knock it. It starts to break down when you're being targeted, when you send to an exchange and that exchange starts reporting your transactions, and they talk to other people and other exchanges, and they also start reporting your transactions, and they start to build up, oh, like, here's a list of transactions we know belongs to whoever. And when people start identifying which transactions are yours, they can start performing analysis on the rings to see which transactions are more likely to be the actually spent outputs and which outputs are more likely to have just been randomly selected and not yours. So while rings are solid at providing reasonable sender privacy, they break down when you're being targeted. And that's what full chain membership proofs attempt to solve. And with rings, you select 16 outputs and call it a day. With full chain membership proofs, you select literally every output that's ever existed on the blockchain. Or in this case, since the most recent protocol upgrade from ringcd to Seraphis, which brings me to my next point. Right now, at MoneroCon, a couple of weeks ago, I announced my work on full chain membership proofs for Monero. I actually built a full technical proof of concept saying, here's how we would do the proof, here's the algorithms for it, here's all the code for it, here's the proving functions, here's the verification functions, here's the exact, academic works used, and here's where they're used, so on and so on. So I built that, and I announced it at MoneroCon a couple of weeks ago.
Were you able to actually go and present in person?
Yeah, I was there in person, and I was the first technical talk.
All right. Okay.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was just great seeing everyone from the community. If you're in the Monero community and want to meet everyone face to face, I can't recommend anything more than the MoneroCon. So I announced it, and that was great. And now the discussions about actually integrating it into Monero. Monero's current privacy protocol is known as ringCT, where it uses ring signatures, and then it also uses confidential transactions referring to amount privacy. And we do have other things for privacy as well. We have receiver privacy, so you can't tell who's receiving funds via stealth addresses. We have network privacy solutions via Dandelion++. We do our best to make sure all wallets look alike. So you can't say, oh, this transaction was sent by StackWallet or CakeWallet or whoever else, and can't, filter users that way. So Monero does have a lot of other privacy mechanisms, but we are looking at evolving our on-chain privacy protocol from RingCT to Seraphis. And what Seraphis does is it breaks down the privacy protocol into this very academic notation. So instead of saying, oh, we have this ring signature, it takes 16 outputs, it says one of them is yours, and that you're using it in this transaction, and it moves on. What Seraphis does is it's like, nope, that's now two very different things. We now have 16 outputs, and we say one of them exists. And then we have a separate proof saying the output that does exist is yours. And by breaking that down, it does two things. One, it just really helps with the academic side of things. It just gives us a lot better notation and separation, which makes it a lot better to do formal analysis and academically ensure the integrity of our protocol. The other thing is when we have two different proofs, one for saying the output exists and one for saying the output belongs to me, it's mine, I'm spending it in this transaction, we get to use much more efficient proofs because they only have to do one thing. They don't have to do two things. So if it just has to do that one thing really well, not both things kind of okay. So with Seraphis, we're replacing the, 1 out of 16 outputs. We were already discussing replacing it with 1 out of 128 outputs. So already a massive increase. And now with my recently submitted proof of concept, which I'm hoping to get productionized and actually integrated into Monero, we're not just discussing 128 outputs, but the entire every output present under the Seraphis protocol upgrade, which is expected to last us for many, many years. Because even as technology evolves, prior we had bulletproofs to hide amounts. Now we have bulletproofs plus. Currently, we're reviewing bulletproofs plus. The advantage with Seraphis is that all of these proofs are very self-contained and strictly modeled. So we can swap out bulletproofs for bulletproofs plus and bulletproofs plus for bulletproofs plus with no contamination to anything else in the protocol and no worries if two things play together nicely, because it doesn't matter how membership is handled. It doesn't matter if it's a ring of 16, a group of 128, or a full chain membership proof. That doesn't matter to the amount proof that proves that this amount is valid despite hiding it, because all that proof has to do is make sure the amount is valid. Whereas in RingCT, it's kind of more of a jumbled ball right now. So full chain membership proofs, they just greatly increase privacy by removing ring signatures once and for all and aim to make targeted surveillance as difficult as possible and significantly more infeasible than currently possible. Being discussed with the upcoming Seraphis upgrade. I'm unsure if we'll make it into the first release of Seraphis or if it will be done in a second release after, but something I'm very proud to have worked on and something I hope to see.
And forgive me if this is a bit of an ignorant question, because I'm not nearly as well versed or really very versed at all in the technical side of things. Is there any possibility of that slowing any processes down versus the current ring signatures?
So there's two kind of things I want to highlight. One refers to the development process. It is replacing a decent amount of code. With Seraphis, we were looking at this one proof to get to 128 outputs in the ring. So we already have code for that. And if we do launch it with Seraphis, we would be replacing all of that code. And we're moving over to it, and we have to update other code that expects it, so on and so on. So yeah, there would definitely be a bit of reorganization there. But the thing about Seraphis is that we can launch it with 128 outputs at the start and then later move to full chain membership proofs. While that wouldn't be optimal regarding privacy because it's delaying the amount of time it takes till we get to full chain membership proofs, it may get us Seraphis significantly earlier and therefore get us to 128 outputs in a ring earlier. With regards to the actual, running a node process, you're running a node, you want to verify transactions. Right, full chain membership proofs are significantly larger. Technically, we don't have to use a ring of 16. Technically, we can already use a ring of 100 million. I think we have 100 million outputs on the chain right now. It would just take several weeks to verify an individual transaction. And then under Seraphis with 128, technically that could also be 100 million. It would just take several days to verify. But with my work currently, it's at 100 milliseconds or a tenth of a second. And I'm hoping to get it down to roughly 16 milliseconds or about a sixth of a second. It's still slower. I think the 128 rings being discussed are about 7 milliseconds. So this is about twice as slow to verify, unfortunately. And then not only is it twice as slow to verify, it's, I believe, 4 times larger for the proof size. So it goes from, I think, a 600 byte proof to a 2 kilobyte proof, 3 or 4 times bigger. So it is a slower and a larger proof, but I definitely believe it's worth it because we're not just discussing, a twice as big privacy set or 4 times as big privacy set. No, we're discussing a privacy set 5 million times larger in theory. So that and the significant amount of privacy it brings to people who truly need it, I believe, make it worth it.
All right. Thank you for explaining kind of both of those different ways to answer that question.
Yeah,
I hadn't intended the second, but the first was actually a good thing to bring up too, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So we've kind of talked mostly about a little bit higher I've been listening, the kind of higher level explanations of things, but what would be your sort of entry level elevator pitch for SeraiDEX for anyone that is just kind of first looking at maybe exploring using a decentralized exchange?
Sure. So the high level pitch is if you have Bitcoin or you have Monero and you want to get Bitcoin or want to get Monero, but you don't want to, trust a centralized exchange. You don't want to be the victim of the next FTX. You make a Bitcoin transaction or just a Monero transaction. You just make a transaction. You send your coins to Serai saying you're doing a swap, and the Serai network just handles it. It's meant to be an identical user experience to instant exchangers, yet with a level of transparency, verifiability, security, and decentralization unmatched. And it's just meant to guarantee your safety.
And then what platforms are you planning for Serai to be available on?
So technically, anyone with a Bitcoin wallet, if they try hard enough, could interact with Serai, but that would not be pretty if you wanted to manually write out Bitcoin transactions. But technically, all you have to do to swap Bitcoin for Monero is just send Bitcoin to Serai somehow with the proper format. Initially, we kind of are discussing a website or a desktop app, but there's a lot of development effort there. I'm not sure we'll be able to get it done at launch. At launch are currently confirmed to be integrated into Cake Wallet. But I also have been discussing with a few other wallets, such as briefly with Stack, though obviously I'm not here to say any guarantees or promises. But there are a few other parties interested who I am trying to be involved with.
All right. So there's a high level of interest, then it sounds like, in integrating into several different places.
Anything we can do to make privacy more accessible.
Definitely. And the website definitely sounds like and desktop sound like a good idea as well. But as you said, of course, these things don't happen quickly always, but something
I'm sure you could be one to understand that.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to go ahead and mention before we wrap things up a little bit? Or do you think you've kind of covered all the points you felt were most important to make sure people understand?
No, just it was a pleasure to be on, and thanks for having me.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you for coming on. We will, of course, have this probably in a couple weeks, I believe. And I always like to just go ahead and ask on here. It makes it to where I can't forget as easily too. What socials, links to sites, Kickstarters, anything like that you'd like to include. So anything like that, go ahead and shout that out now, and I'll make sure and have it included in the description.
Yeah, definitely. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Kayaba Nerve, Kayaba Nerve, Nerve. And then also at SeraiDEX, SeraiDEX. So those are definitely the two best places to follow us. We're also technically on Mastodon, but I'd have to double check the domains for that. And then we have a Discord and Matrix, but I don't remember their short links off the top of my head. So I'll send them to you if you want to put them in the description of wherever possible.
Sure, yeah. If you do want to go ahead and send those, if you can either find me on Telegram, Twitter, something like that. And I believe on both of those, I am stack_Lexa, Lexa.
Got it.
All right, well, I'll get those included before this goes up, and I'll let you get on with the rest of your day. But Kayaba, thank you so much for coming on here and giving such a good description of Serai and kind of your experience thus far. And I will look you up and follow you and continue to see what comes of the project.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Bye.